I think it's time for the Jets to make a coaching change. It's not just about Sunday's loss to the Miami Dolphins. It's not just about the team's overall record over the last 3 seasons. We're getting into the case against Robert Saleh today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, December 19th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. You enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, on today's show, I'm going to lay out the case for why I think the Jets should make a coaching change. I went into it yesterday in the game recap when I talked about how the Miami Dolphins dismantled the New York Jets. And I started thinking this through a little bit. And I think after a game like that, when I make a call for a change, it's natural to wonder, is John being a little overly emotional? Is he taking one loss too hard? And the answer to that is, well, of course I was upset with the way the Jets played. I think you were probably just as upset as I was. But my concerns about Saleh have been building over the last, I'd say maybe year and a half. You know, I think whenever a coach is hired initially, you got to give him some time to grow into the job. You know, especially a first-time head coach, it's not going to be great right off the bat. Saleh inherited a mess from Adam Gase, so it was going to take time. Even if this was going to be successful, there were going to be some initial rough patches. But you reach a point where 3 years in, and we're nearing the end of year 3, you can have at least begin to have a good feel for whether a guy is the right fit for your team. And I think there are many ways in which Robert Saleh falls short right now. Now, of course, in the NFL, sometimes coaches learn. And I certainly hope that if Robert Saleh remains, and my guess is that despite all of my calls right now, he's probably going to be the coach here in 2024. So I certainly hope he grows if he remains here. Sometimes it doesn't work for a coach on the first stop. Sometimes it doesn't work for a coach on the second stop either. Sometimes it takes the third stop. Pete Carroll in Seattle is a good example. Failed with the Jets, was run out of town after one season in '94, went to the Patriots, took a Super Bowl team, and when that team was left a mess when Bill Belichick took them over. Carroll went to Seattle after a stint in college and was very successful. Belichick himself, it took him a second chance to be successful after a failed stint with the Cleveland Browns. So certainly you hope that Saleh learns from this experience here. But I just think that there are too many things that are wrong with this team right now and with the way Saleh is running it, that to make continuing with this a good idea. Now, if you look at Saleh's record over the last 3 seasons, 16-32. So the Jets are winning about 1 out of every 3 games. Actually, the Jets are winning exactly 1 out of every 3 games with Saleh as the coach. Now, of course, we judge in the NFL on wins and losses, but especially the first couple of years of a coach's tenure, the one-loss record can be a little deceiving because sometimes you inherit a really bad situation and you rack up a year or two where your record's terrible. Let me give you an example. Heading into last season, this was as recent as last season, heading into 2022, Kyle Shanahan of San Francisco had a sub-500 career record as a head coach. And that was heading into last season where he had gone to a Super Bowl and gone to another NFC championship game. It was on the verge of leading his team to another NFC championship game. He entered last season with a losing record on his career. So, you know, first couple of years, 3 years in, the losing record is not necessarily the end of the world as a head coach. The question is the trajectory going in the right direction? And in that case, I mean, you look at it, Saleh is on his way to a 3rd losing season. Jets are very likely to win less games than they did last year when they went 7-10. But I think you have to look a little deeper. I think you have to go under the hood. And my old buddy Mike Nania of Jets X Factor had really compelling tweets arguing against Saleh yesterday, and he laid out stats in excruciating detail that under Saleh, the Jets have lost 17 games by 14 points or more. Jets have won 16 games under Saleh, so they have more losses by 2 touchdowns than they have wins. That's a really, really bad number. And that's, that comes to, are you keeping your team competitive? Nania also noted that the Jets have the most 20-plus point losses in the entire NFL this season. So the Jets have lost by 20 points 5 times this year, according to Michael Nania. And since Saleh took over, the Jets have the second largest average margin of defeat in their losses, 13.8 points. So when the Jets lose, they're losing by around 14 points. They're losing by just about 2 touchdowns. So this is bad. And this tells me that this record at least has something to do with coaching. Because, every coach needs talent. And I think if you're going to defend Saleh, the first place you go is the quarterback position. Because Saleh has been given horrible quarterbacks. I mean, look at the guys who have started games for the Jets. There's only one good one, and he only played 4 snaps. That's Aaron Rodgers. So he had Aaron Rodgers for 4 snaps. That's the extent to which Saleh has been given quality quarterbacks. You can go down the list. Zach Wilson, Mike White, who of course had a flash or two, but not that great. Joe Flacco. I know Flacco is winning a couple games in Cleveland, but the Jets version of Joe Flacco is not that good. And, the run in Cleveland's going to run out. Flacco used to be a good quarterback. He's not a good quarterback. Whatever you may see in Cleveland right now, he's at the end of his career. Maybe you can squeeze a couple good games out of him. At this point of his career, Flacco is not a good quarterback. You want to talk this year, Tim Boyle. It's not good. So I understand that. And that's an excuse for losing. But is it an excuse for not being competitive? I don't think so. And that's really where you kind of lose me, is that the Jets, when they lose under Saleh, they get crushed. And, okay, a good coach maybe can't win games when his roster stinks, when he doesn't have good quarterback play, but you shouldn't be getting blown out. One of the questions I ask with a coach is this coach making things better than they would be otherwise? Is this guy reaching his team? And some of these things are very difficult to quantify. It's not easy to see, is a coach, get motivating his players. There's no direct way to see it. But when the team's consistently getting blown out, when the team's not playing competitive football so frequently, I think that that's a sign that the coach, whatever he's trying, is not working. And, some of it might be X's and O's. I think a lot of it's philosophical. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But I think ultimately, you could say, we have a bad team. We're not going to beat most opponents. But, there's a difference between fighting hard. There's a difference between giving another team all you got and losing. So, a good coach probably should be able to keep games close, right? A good coach, maybe you lose by 6 instead of 20. Maybe you figure out ways to squeeze an extra possession here or there. These are not things Saleh is doing. And I think that that's a mark against him. And I think if you look at this record, I think when you look at the extent to which they're getting crushed, how many times do you see the Jets not prepared? How many times do you see the Jets get knocked out early on? And that's maybe where the Miami game struck such a chord with me. It's not like it's the first time that's happened. We've seen it over and over for 3 years. And now the Jets are out of the playoffs again, and they're not even really close to the playoffs. At some point, I think it has to fall on the head coach. Why do the Jets have such a tough time, though? Why are they getting blown out so frequently? Why are they winning so infrequently? I think a lot of this goes to Robert Saleh's philosophy. As we continue on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast, I'm going to tell you some ways where I think philosophically Saleh is simply misguided. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. You should not have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and a best price guarantee. Gametime takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is great for last-minute seats. Plenty of great seats still available, I presume, when the Jets face the Washington Commanders, 2 of the worst teams in the NFL, this coming Sunday at MetLife Stadium. But it can be fun to go to late season games when the Jets are out of the race. The ticket deals are really good. You can get an excellent seat. And, sometimes with relatively stress-free viewing, because the Jets are out of the playoff race, you really can enjoy yourself. You should check out the Gametime app. I've used it myself to go to events. I found great deals. And they also have exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And then when you're done with Locked On Jets, you should know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering all the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Today on Locked On Jets, I'm laying out the case for why I think the Jets need to make a coaching change. Robert Saleh has not gotten the results, but I think part of the reason he's not getting the results is philosophically he's behind the times. And I think this manifests itself in a couple of different ways. I laid out for you in the first segment that the Jets constantly get blown out. They don't blow teams out, though. I mean, if you look this year, of the 5 wins, only 2 of them were multi-score wins, and one of them I don't even think really counts as that because they got like a late defensive touchdown to ice the game against Denver. That was a 1-score game with 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Jets eke out wins, but when they lose, they get blown out. And I think this speaks to, and this is something you see sometimes. I think defensive coaches in general get stereotyped with this tag, and it's not always fair. But Saleh being a defensive coach is one that sticks in your mind. He wants his defense to win games. So he wants to keep it low scoring. He views the offense's job as just stay out of the way of the defense. Don't make any big mistakes. The old Herm Edwards line, any drive that ends in a kick is a good drive. As long as you're not turning it over, if we punted, it's fine. And I just think that that's not a recipe for success in today's NFL. And I would even go further than that. You go back 4 decades, the great 49ers coach Bill Walsh. So this is a 40-year-old philosophy. He was a guy who was always obsessed with 10-point victories. He wanted to win games by multiple scores. Why did he do that? Well, Jets fans will probably understand this pretty well. The reason Bill Walsh, the great 49ers coach, legend, a guy ahead of his time, felt that he wanted to emphasize winning games by multiple scores is that in a 1-score game, a bad call that goes against you can cost you the game. So if you're up 2 scores, one bad call, maybe it sets up another team's touchdown, but you're still ahead if you're up 2 scores. If you're only up 1 score, a bad call can cost you everything. It can cost you the game. So I think you probably get that. If you watch the Jets, you understand that a bad call can cost you everything. And this is one of the reasons, like, I went crazy in the Kansas City game. Everybody was focused on these calls that were in the fourth quarter. Well, NFL officials are bad. They're going to blow calls. I was focused on the first quarter when the Jets fell behind 17-0 because that took them out of any territory where they could win the game by multiple scores. But Saleh's philosophy, and you see it in the way that they build their offense. I mean, the Jets have been among the league leaders in the run, pass, first, second down sequence this year. Saleh is also not super aggressive on 4th downs. Now, I know they ran a fake punt against Miami, but if you look at the data last year, Football Outsiders puts together a metric on 4th down aggressiveness. They figure, where are the spots where an aggressive coach would go for it on 4th down. Saleh was at the bottom. This year, if you look at aggressiveness, Saleh's at the bottom on 4th downs. They're not trying to put, I'm not saying they're not trying to put points on the board, but they view it as like offense is just something to stay out of the way of the defense. And that's not something that works in today's NFL, especially in a league that for 100 years, this goes beyond, the 2020s. It goes back as long as the leagues existed. The rules have been changing to emphasize offense more and more because the powers that be know that you generate interest with offense. So offenses continue to gain an advantage. If you don't have an offense that puts up points, it's tough to win in the NFL. And this goes to some of the coaching hires he's made. I think that Nathaniel Hackett's a very conservative offensive coordinator. And yes, listen, Hackett's here in part, and no small part, because the Jets were trying to lure Aaron Rodgers here. But I don't think you could say that's the only reason. I think that if you look through their histories, Robert Saleh and Nathaniel Hackett worked together. My guess is that played a role in it. I think my theory on this is just my theory, is that Saleh wanted to hire Hackett. Woody Johnson came in last year and said, we need to change offensive coordinators because Woody Johnson needed somebody to blame for the Jets' late season collapse. So he went in and said, we need to change offensive coordinators. So Saleh found this guy he worked with in Jacksonville, somebody who shared his philosophy, somebody who was ultra conservative. And the way Saleh probably sold it to Woody Johnson is, hey, this guy loves Rodgers. This guy can help us get Rodgers. I guess it kind of worked in that sense. But I think this speaks to the issues with Saleh. And, you look at the offensive side of the ball. I don't agree with people who say you can't hire a defensive head coach in the league. There are plenty of defensive coaches who are doing pretty good jobs, who have built good offenses, who have made good offensive hires. Sean McDermott in Buffalo, we have one in our division who's a good example. But I think in Saleh's case, he really doesn't get what offense is in today's NFL. I mean, look at the Jets' offense last year. It was bad. Mike LaFleur was fired, or he was let go, or whatever. They let LaFleur go to the Rams, where he's having a lot more success this year working under Sean McVay. Big surprise there. But I don't understand how Saleh looked at the Jets' offense last year, and then at the end of the season decided, you know what, we need to hire somebody who ran an offense worse than ours last year to take over. That's what Nathaniel Hackett did in Denver. And taking it a step further, if you look at the other key offensive hires that Saleh made, there were two guys from the Tennessee Titans staff, Todd Downing, who was the Titans offensive coordinator, now has a role under Hackett, and Keith Carter, who's the Titans offensive line coach. Titans offense was almost as bad as the Jets offense last year. They scored 2 more points through the entire season. That's not 2 points per game. That's 2 more points in the entire season. So I don't know how Saleh looks at this and says, you know what, we need to hire. Our offense wasn't good enough last year. Let's bring in guys from offenses that were just as bad or worse. And I feel like it probably goes to something you see a lot in the NFL. We certainly saw it back with Todd Bowles. There's always a fine line between bringing in guys who are your friends and bringing in guys who are effective on the job. And it's always a gamble when you hire somebody you don't have a past with. I know you see this taken to an extreme where people are like, you shouldn't care if you've worked with somebody in the past. You shouldn't care if you have a relationship with them. You should just hire the best coach. Well, sometimes you don't know somebody. They come in and they run. You just don't mesh with them. Coaching staffs are like teams too. The pieces need to fit. The personalities need to mesh. And there's something to be said for hiring somebody you're familiar with. But you don't want to take it too far. You don't want to hire people just because they're your friends. You also need to worry about whether or not they're effective at their jobs. And the coaches the Jets brought in are not effective at their jobs. And part of the reason they're not effective at their jobs is they seem to share in Saleh's conservative mindset when it comes to offense. And that's just not good enough. And yeah, you could argue if Aaron Rodgers is out there, they'd have more trust in him and Rodgers would be running this offense at the line. But I go back to something I said yesterday. I don't think it should take Aaron Rodgers for this to be a decent team. And for this to be a decent team, the offense has to be better. And ultimately, you can say that Saleh runs a good defense, but Saleh's not the defensive coordinator. Saleh's responsible for the whole team. So you cannot divorce Saleh from this offense and its performance. And a lot of it goes back, I think, to his overall philosophies. Now, of course, Robert Saleh is not a coach who's all bad. He brings certain things to the table, including the defense. Well, should that mean he keeps his job? I don't think so. And I'm going to explain to you why as we continue on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. The Jets, I don't know, will they be looking for a new coach? They certainly need new players on the offense. Maybe they should look to LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn's not just another jobs board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. It's so easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. And they even launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. Here on this Tuesday, we're talking about why I think the Jets need to make a coaching change. I feel awful about doing a show like this on Christmas week, calling for somebody to be fired, but the Jets are a business. They're a professional football team. I have nothing personally against Robert Saleh. He seems like a great guy. I've never met him. Everybody I know who's encountered him, very impressive man. Nothing personal against him. I just don't think he's the right guy for the New York Jets right now. And I try and look at this objectively. And you know something, Robert Saleh is not all bad. There are good things he brings to the table. Look at the job he's done with the defense. You know, we just talked about how, you know, sometimes you hire guys in the NFL because you know them, because they're your friend, and you don't really care like whether or not they're effective at doing the job. And there's the balance, because if you bring in somebody you don't know who's got a great resume, they may not work all that well with you. Saleh has done a great job striking that balance on the defensive side of the ball. And I think you begin with Jeff Ulbrich, who probably is going to generate some head coaching buzz this offseason because of the work he's done with the Jets defense. You know, Saleh, Ulbrich go back. Ulbrich's good at his job. The two of them mesh really well. That's well done. And a lot of what Saleh's done on the defense is been good. He has a distinct philosophy. He's flexible, though, because the Jets blitzed more in 2021 when they did not have a great defensive line. Now that the defensive line's loaded up, you know, they blitz less. They blitz as little as any team in the league. There's a philosophy. They value defensive linemen. They've shown that they've got the ability to develop good defensive linemen. Bryce Huff, Jermaine Johnson look really good. John Franklin Myers went from being a waiver wire pickup to a good starter. I'd say even Quinnen Williams, who, you know, was good under Greg Williams, but wasn't great, and he's become the all-pro we dreamed he'd be when the Jets drafted him out of Alabama. Player development's been really good. They've worked well with the front office on the defensive side of the ball, finding players who fit their scheme. I mean, DJ Reed, as good of a free agent signing the Jets have had, I'd say, in 25 years. I mean, I think obviously the offseason of 98 when they signed two Hall of Famers, Curtis Martin, Kevin Mawai, that's the gold standard. But since then, I'm not sure there's been a better free agent addition from another team than DJ Reed. So maybe since 99. You know, 98 was Martin Mawai, so we'll take that out. But since 99, I've tried to go back. I don't know if there's been a better free agent addition since DJ Reed. They've developed corners. I mean, Michael Carter II has turned into a great slot corner. Quincy Williams, look, and they've developed linebackers. Look at Quincy Williams, the job he's done. Waiver wire pickup, player development, working with the front office, understanding what the style of player you want, motivating these guys to be their best. And, you know, even like some of the bigger picture stuff, like loading up on the defensive line so you can rotate guys in and out so guys don't get worn out. So you have depth at the most important spots. Keeping things simple. I mean, you know, as much as people criticize the Jets for keeping a pretty simple defense, it's a philosophy that's worked time and again in the NFL, where you'd run the same stuff over and over again. Your guys just instinctually know what to do in any situation because they've already seen it. You have a more voluminous playbook. You know, guys have to think a little bit more. And that's also, look, I'm not saying that one's better than the other. I think I think a lot of this philosophical stuff, people like act like there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. But it's not so much a question of what your philosophy is. It's, can you implement your philosophy correctly? Saleh can on the defensive side of the ball. So you have a guy who's excellent at building a defense, guy who's made really smart hires of subordinates, guy who understands exactly what he wants to do philosophically, guy who understands how to implement it. You know what I think? There's a phrase for a coach like this, especially when that coach struggles on the bigger picture stuff, when he struggles on the offensive side of the ball, when he, you know, is not a great game manager, but he does all that stuff on defense. There's a phrase for it. It's a defensive coordinator. And Robert Saleh would not be the first coach in the NFL. Could be a really good coordinator, but maybe not such a great head coach. And maybe that could change. If he's back next year, I hope it changes. And sometimes, you know, it takes a couple of years to get going. There are stories of coaches who struggled early in their careers as head coaches and maybe spent an offseason thinking about what's going wrong. What could I do better? If the Jets don't make a change, I certainly hope that's what Saleh does, because the Jets, if he's going to be here next year, I certainly hope he has success. But I've also seen more often that coaches don't change, at least until they have some time to get away from it, to reflect and maybe get a second opportunity. And I'm not saying Saleh can't be successful in a second opportunity. I'm hoping he's one of the outliers who, if he stays, who really reflects on what he's done wrong and reflects on some of the shortcomings of his overall philosophies and changes heading into next season. I just don't have a lot of confidence that's going to happen. And I hate saying it, but I think it is probably time for a change for the New York Jets. And it's not just about them losing to Miami. I felt like yesterday, you know, I mentioned this and maybe people thought it was a little reactionary. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And, you know, whether you agree or disagree with it, I wanted to make sure that this was not just me in the heat of the moment calling for a coach's job after the Jets lost to the Dolphins. I try not to do that. I try and be thoughtful about longer term things. You know, is this the right coach moving forward? I think in Saleh's case, he's probably not, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source and enjoy Locked On Jets, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy Locked On Jets, give this episode a big thumbs up on YouTube. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. I hope you have a great Tuesday, everybody. Tomorrow we'll do our weekly mailbag show, so please feel free to send in your questions, and I look forward to answering them.